My name is Ellen Bruex, and I am an interdisciplinary visual artist and creative writer working and living in Washington State. Recently, I've been using text as both language and a visual element in my installation work. My visual art is inspired by my poetry practice, and I'm interested in creating spaces where viewers can move through and experience the feeling or the essence of a poem in a three-dimensional environment. A Murmuration of Meanwhiles is an art installation composed of about 400 hanging pieces of clear extruded acrylic, better known as plexiglass. And about half of these pieces were repurposed from COVID barriers that were used during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and donated to me during the production of this project by a handful of local businesses. Each piece and each letter on each piece is hand-drawn and then programmed to be cut out using a laser cutter. This installation is exemplary of my work as a text-based visual artist using language as a literary element and a visual element because this show comes out of a poem that I wrote called The Meanwhiles. A pink sprinkle dances in a jar flipped thrice, lands sideways on a wish, flashes, hits hips with its neighbor. A yellow sprinkle tips. Gravity casts its spell. Meanwhile, red ethanol contracts in its thin home of glass. Meanwhile, a latch retracts, then returns to its strike plate. Meanwhile, a flywheel, a piston, oxygen fuel, and a spark plug explode into motion. Meanwhile, light against a local newspaper passes through a cornea, kisses the retina, the optic nerve whispers to the brain, collapse. Meanwhile, the reclaimed planks of a tiny yellow house quietly rot under a 2-day-old coat of paint. Meanwhile, a coffee mug hugs a fresh lemon slice, a toy banana, and a plastic thrift store crescent moon. Meanwhile, a bearing ball rotates in its socket, transferring black ink onto the appropriate line of a lonely legal document. Meanwhile, silence, save for the pad of a cat's paw against an antique oak floorboard. Meanwhile, a tab opens, a larynx rises, amber whiskey sinks. Meanwhile, 3 sets of molars masticate cosmic crisps and pita chips on the folded down back seat of a beat-up Subaru. Meanwhile, the neon outlines of arrows illuminate, go dark, illuminate, go dark, illuminate. Meanwhile, time holds its breath for a moment or an era and rearranges the flower pots. The sprinkles form a celebratory herd, pick up speed, become a tiny, unstoppable stampede. A Murmuration of Meanwhiles is my three-dimensional interpretation of what the Meanwhiles as a poem is expressing. Both the poem and the installation are the culmination of a couple years of research and ethnographic study into beginnings and endings and what's happening during the human experience of beginnings and endings and the space and the moments in between those experiences. I really wanted to create an experience where people could stand among these meanwhiles, look into them, look through them, consider the negative space within them and between them. So viewers were able to walk among the meanwhiles, sometimes being guided by the form of the installation itself and some natural pathways that I created when installing it, and other times finding their own pathways by ducking under or searching for new and less obvious pathways. Some questions that I hope the viewers would ask and consider as they move among the meanwhiles is, what does it mean to have something cut away? What does it mean to have something removed or to have an absence? And then what can be created with the remnants? What does it mean to have negative space taken from a material and then be able to create something new with those remnants? What are the remnants? What remains when something is taken away? What's still there, and how does that create a new reality? What's happening for one viewer as they're looking through the meanwhiles and seeing someone else on the other side? Someone else on the other side of the high tunnel is experiencing their own version of the meanwhiles, and you can see that happening as you're looking through them. This installation happened in a really unique environment. The show was initially installed in the spring of 2023 in a high tunnel, which is a large greenhouse on the property of Radix Farm in Malaga, Washington. And the high tunnel itself is a sort of meanwhile. It's a liminal space with its translucent walls that allow natural light to flow in, fresh air to enter, yet it's a protected space. So to me, it's both an indoor and an outdoor space. It's both contained and open. It's a generative space. It's meant for new beginnings, incubation, growth, new life, which is really aligned with the concepts that I mentioned earlier and also my idea of what art should be. Malaga is a small rural community of about 2,000 people, which sits about 20 minutes outside of Wenatchee, Washington. And Wenatchee itself is a small town with a population of about 35,000. I chose to have this show at Radix Farm because it highlights the unique opportunities, constraints, and challenges of being a working contemporary artist in a micropolitan or rural area, or really anywhere outside of the major urban hubs. I wanted to create an experience where there was a sense of awe or a sense of mystery. The venue, the high tunnel at Radix Farm, allowed that to happen particularly well because I was working in collaboration with the natural light of the sun and the clouds. And throughout the day, the evening, and the night, the Meanwhiles really took on a new personality with each passing moment. And that invited viewers to consider the Meanwhiles in different capacities. So sometimes they caught the light and became almost reflective, while other times the entire installation nearly disappeared in more ambient or diffused light, leaving the space appear almost empty at first glance. The opening night of the original installation was accompanied by a sound artist and an adjacent bonfire, which made this both an art show, a whole body sensory experience, and an event in itself. I see art as a reason for people to gather, offering a springboard into inquiry and discussion, and offering an invitation to consider meaningful topics and a way to experience being human. In recent exhibitions, I've invited participants to consider their own experiences and reciprocate by creating a small piece to contribute to a community collection. I'm very interested as an artist in how I can create or facilitate events where people in my community or in other rural and micropolitan communities can gather and have a good time and experience community, because ultimately, I think that's what art is all about.
I know, I was about to say that, and I was like, what do you think?
It's warming up here. It's supposed to thaw out.
Yeah. So, yeah, like 3 months, about a little less than 3 months. And it was like, once I got the idea, it was working hard, like so rush, like every weekend.
And where did you get the